The Resource Conservation and Recovery Act of 1976, also known as RCRA, grants the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, the authority to regulate solid and hazardous wastes. In American Mining Congress versus EPA, the Eighth Circuit considered whether the agency's regulations of recycled and reused materials had gone too far. RCRA made hazardous wastes a subset of solid waste, which it defined to include garbage, sludge, and, quote, other discarded material, unquote. As the EPA worked on its proposed regulations, its interpretation of the meaning of the phrase discarded material evolved. In 1980, it issued interim regulations that excluded intermediate products that resulted from multi-stage industrial processes and that were incorporated into the next step of the process. The EPA then became concerned that some materials held for recycling could be considered hazardous wastes and needed to be regulated. The EPA's final rule, issued in 1985, included in its definition of solid waste a number of secondary materials, including materials that were used for fuel, reclaimed, or accumulated speculatively as part of a manufacturing process. The American Mining Congress and American Petroleum Institute challenged the scope of the final rule. They argued that under RCRA's definition of solid waste, the EPA's authority was limited to regulating materials that were actually discarded or intended for disposal, and that this rule would regulate in-process secondary materials that hadn't been discarded. The industry organizations pointed out that petroleum refining involves multiple processing stages that recoup leftover materials from previous stages, so that all the material is eventually refined. Extracting metals from mined material likewise involves multiple steps, in which the same materials are processed repeatedly to remove as much pure metal as possible. The organizations argued that under the EPA's final rule, these processes would be subject to regulation under RCRA. The District of Columbia Circuit considered the challenge.